Hi, this is Mariah Gullo from The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm in studio today with Zoe Kazan.
Hi.
Hi, Zoe. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mariah?
Good. You're having quite the winter.
Yes.
You just had a baby.
Yes.
And you just had Wildlife come out.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Ballad of Buster Scruggs is coming out.
That's correct. Don't worry about tripping over it. Everyone trips over it. I think Ballad of Buster Scruggs is like a tongue twister somehow.
Yeah, I thought I did pretty well.
You did great.
This is your big acting role for this year.
And
it's getting a lot of attention. Were you able to see the rest of the anthology?
I hadn't seen the rest of it until I got to see the film at the beginning of September, I think. But I had read all of the other chapters before we went and shot it.
Right. And as a writer, how did it feel to get your hands on a Coen Brothers script?
I mean, really exciting. Yeah. I had read the script for No Country for Old Men years ago because I had gone in for like a tiny part on that in the first year that I was out of school. And I was astonished by how visual their writing is. Like, they're really writing what the camera will see. And it kind of opened my eyes at that point as to what a screenplay could be. This is a very unusual film. You know, it's told in 6 distinct chapters. They all are Westerns, but they all have a different relationship to the genre. So it's like sort of like opening like a box of candy or something. Like, there are so many different kinds of treats, and they wrote the first chapter of it almost 20 years ago, the Coen brothers, and then the last chapter of it they wrote right before we shot. And so there's this wonderful sense of like getting to see their minds ruminate on the same topic over 20 years.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I thought so.
And where does your segment, where does that fall? The girl who got rattled. The gal
who got rattled. It's the 5th of 6 segments. So it's the second to last. It's the longest. I think I think they wrote it in the last 2 years.
It's more of a recent one.
Yeah, more recent. They had written the first 3 or 4 over the course of like 15 years, and then the last 2 they wrote once they realized, we can put these all together and make one movie out of them.
And your role, it's one of the only female protagonist roles in the entire anthology.
I think it's only one of 3 women in the entire thing, or 4 women, yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel like a large responsibility to
I did, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's mind is on issues of representation now, or there's this sort of heightened awareness.
Yes.
And, I've read a lot of scripts where there's only one woman in it. I think that passes muster less and less. The Coens, I think, historically have written really interesting female roles.
Yes.
And I think they're I've never had a less gendered experience on a set in my entire career. I think they're truly egalitarian when it comes to issues of gender. I didn't think that, it's a deficit in the script, but I did think if we're going to only have 1 or 2 female protagonists in this whole thing, I better make sure that I'm doing my job. I don't know, but it's also, it's the Coen brothers, and you want to do a good job as an actor anyways, because they're sort of like, they're the kind of filmmakers that actors dream their entire career of getting to work with, and this was such a special role, and so she popped off the page to me, and so I just felt really lucky that I was the person they chose to play her.
How does the dialogue feel in your mouth? Because it's one of the things, I watched this movie with my mother, and one of the things she said is the lack of contractions and the way the dialogue flows. She thought it might be very difficult.
Well, it's very old-fashioned, the writing. It's very formal. It's set in the mid-1800s, so people talk differently, but you want to still feel like, I don't know, that it's not like historical recreation, that it's happening in a present tense way, even though it's set in this different time. But, in that way, it was a lot more like theater roles that I've played, roles I've played on stage. I haven't gotten to do that much period stuff on film, and so this was a real, joy for me. And yes, the language is more, takes some, I have words like apathem, which you have to get used to saying as if it's, has come from your brain. But that's sort of the fun of it.
Mm-hmm. What is it about the Old West that really captures the imagination of big filmmakers?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that people think of the Western as being a quintessentially American form, and I think it is because I think there's an American preoccupation with the West that infiltrates every aspect of our art. It, like, is in the great American novels. It's in, like Willa Cather's O Pioneers and John Steinbeck's East of Eden. Like, there's a sense of it in, our great portraiture, like, even, like, the famous portraits of the presidents, like, even Mount Rushmore, which I went to see for the first time when I was shooting this. Like, there's a sense of, like, Western expansion, where the gaze is going, you know, like, we have a myth of the American West, which feels totally unique to this country. I think that you even see it in the way that we as a country thought about the space race. Like, the space was this sort of, like, final frontier. And in that way, I think it actually connects up to, like, the internet age, that now that, like, Western border has gone online. It's also just a very beautiful part of our country, or it was at one point. And so I think, like, if you look at something that stands outside of the realm of the Western, like Lawrence of Arabia, it's taking those same kind of vistas. Like, there's something incredibly cinematic about that big sky, like, big desert, like, those prairies that go on forever, and having this, like, beautiful canvas to put a person on, or put a horse on, or put a gun in front of. Like, there's something about that brutality of the West with the beauty of it, like, just feels like the cinematic idea of it is, like, baked into the landscape.
Let's talk a little bit about the character of Alice. Does President Pierce represent Alice's inability to let go of the past?
God, that's a great question. So I have this little dog in the movie, which I've inherited from my brother who has died. Spoiler alert. And I do think that there's something, like, metaphorical about the dog. And I do think that there's something in Alice that is afraid to live, like, afraid to step out of her cage. She's been put in this kind of position by her brother where she's living in an incredibly passive way. And when we meet her, we see her suddenly thrust into a position where she has to start making decisions. And this dog, like, is yappy and annoying and just won't leave her alone and gets her into trouble. And I do think that there's something about the past, or her attachment to fear, that is embodied in the dog. I think that's smart.
Do you think that now that you have worked with the Coen brothers, do you understand kind of their working, the themes that they have kind of created throughout their careers a little better?
Well, I did something really nerdy before we shot, which is that I rewatched almost all of their films in order before I went out there, which was really just for fun, because when else am I going to get to do that? I was really surprised at what was sort of revealed as I watched. I do see, like, a true preoccupation with death running through many of their films, and their sensibility, their sort of, like, that thing of humor and pathos being on either side of a knife's edge, and that it can tilt either way. I think they have a very particular relationship with dread. I think they're very good at building dread through humor, which is unusual. I think the thing that struck me most of all is that they don't have a thing. Like, they're not doing the same thing over and over again. They're doing a new thing almost every time. Like, they really strike me as being incredibly brave. Like, they seem to throw out the playbook every time. And I think it's a very special kind of artist that cares more about the exploration through the art than they do about the success of it.
You get distracted a lot by the humor and the gore of a Coen brothers movie. On the other side of that is death, which is, filmmakers tend to have death as a theme. It always seems more serious and heavy and dramatic, but the Coen brothers tend to distract you with other things so that you're not paying attention to the underlying theme.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of becomes literalized in Buster Scruggs. You know, there are chapters of it that treat death like an entertainment, and then there are chapters of it that allow you to feel the repercussions of, like, what death really is. And I do think that that's part of that preoccupation is part of the subject matter in this particular film.
So after doing all of that research with the Coen brothers movies and then being in this one, did it spark your inspiration as a filmmaker?
Gosh, I mean, I would say they're so extraordinarily talented, so extraordinarily smart. There's nothing that you can imitate about it. Like, it's almost difficult to draw inspiration from because the, like, mechanics of it don't feel very clear. I mean, I spent a long time with the script, and I still don't understand how they wrote it. Like, it's, you know, they're masters of what they do.
So I wanted to talk to you about your experience, your writing experience, especially after you said you spent a lot of time with the Coen brothers script and still didn't understand how they did it. It sounds like you like to observe and to dissect what the movie making process. Do you have a particular way that you like to write, or is it evolving and changing as you write more movies?
I definitely think it's evolving. I was looking at something that I had written maybe 7 years ago. It was in my computer, and I was surprised by how young my writing seemed to me. I think that's the hope that you know, I'll look back at what I'm writing now in 5 years and think it seems like impossibly young. But my brain still basically works the same way. I had been a person who, like, used my scripts to sort of, like, get me through the day. Like, I would be, you know, having insomnia at 3 a.m. and be like, maybe I'll open that scene and just fix it a little bit. And I think you can do a lot of damage that way. Having the confidence to put something away, step away from it, let my brain work on other things, and come back to it with new eyes, it just changed things for me entirely. I think it took my writing to a new level. It took my relationship with my writing to a different place. And then also writing Wildlife with Paul. It was the first time I adapted. It was the first time I wrote with someone, and it was the first time I wrote for a particular director's vision. Having to learn how to think, like, in that way, where you're, like, acting as, like, a midwife for someone else's idea or someone else's aesthetic, but putting that baby, like, through your own body. Like, it was really instructive to me. I think it made me a much more precise writer. Structure became something that I understood in a new way, like as a tool rather than as infrastructure. I don't know, it was just a totally eye-opening experience.
And I've heard you say before in other interviews that you kind of got more involved in the editing process as well for Wildlife.
Yeah.
So now that you're kind of taking a real deep dive into and ownership of the movie making process, I have to ask, do you have any desire to direct?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I learned more in the editing room on Wildlife than in almost any artistic experience I've ever had. We have this wonderful editor, Matt Hannum, who I love very dearly, and working with him taught me so much. Working alongside Paul, Paul had such a clear vision of how certain scenes should be edited. They were shot to be edited that way. But also, as a writer, like, there were, you know, we thought that we had that script down to its sparest possible essence. And we didn't. Like, one of the things I learned in the editing room was, like, an actor's gesture can hold all the information that a whole scene can hold. Like, just a costume choice can hold that much information. And so all of that made me, yes, want to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, and direct. But it also taught me, like, you shouldn't do that unless you have something that you absolutely feel ready to donate 2 years of your life to.
Right, you're waiting for that.
Yeah.
For the thing that will take you there.
Big love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And last question to you. How does all this, like, foray into executive producing inform back on your acting career?
I really love the process of filmmaking, and it's one of the things that made me want to be an actor. I love the collaborative process, and it's so different than sitting alone in your room writing, you know, what happens on set between you and the camera and the director and the other actors. And in a perfect world, I would want to feel as much authorship on everything as I do on the things that I write and that I've helped produce. But working on Buster Scruggs, for instance, I had no impulse at all to step in and change anything or want to roll up my sleeves and be on that producing team because they knew so much. And it was just an opportunity for me to sit back and learn. And I think it's probably good for me to be reminded that I don't know everything. I think, I don't know, when I first started out in this business, I assumed that I didn't know anything. Mm-hmm. So I was walking onto every set like it was going to be a learning experience. And I think, I've worked with many first-time filmmakers, and at a certain point I had been on more sets than some of the people that I was, working for. Uh-huh. And it definitely made me stop assuming that I didn't know everything.
Right.
And it's a very good thing to be reminded of, and to be reminded to walk in to any situation thinking I could learn something here.
The art of letting go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Zoe Kazan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
The movie is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs on Netflix and theatrically.